Let's go with lo-fi heartbeats. Mm, Not bad. Today's just kind of a chill day, I guess. Uh, just gonna run my. Well, gotta go after some badges. Oh wait, there were badges in here that I should go and get. Just working for the accolades. Don't really have anything else to talk about. Well, there's lots of things I probably could talk about, but just don't want to. Okay, let's. Uh, I'm not even gonna ask why there's contaminated in here. There we go. I think now you can hear a little bit of what's in my ear. I don't know how loud something has to be or how complete it has to be for algorithms to cut in. And I have no idea if any of the music that I'm listening to is even under a uh, sort of like Ventagarden. Ventagarden has a license out so that you can use all of his music for streaming purposes. And there's a couple others, Cell Dweller slash Kate, Clayton. Um, One of his or a music label he had found. I'm not really sure what's going on there with it, but a music label Clayton's involved with. They release instrumental tracks that are explicitly for licensed to use while streaming, so that you can have a little bit of music background. I probably should have just done more, more research or worked something up. I've heard something other streamers talk about. They just leave the music samples on auto or something. Okay, that was every single badge in here. Rough Night, Wolf Reek. Yeah, it's not bad. Oh, all of these tracks are just like a minute long. Eh, well, I guess that's okay. Um, okay. Do I have an answer for what was going on with Fantasy Star Online 2? I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I have suspicions. It's just the age of my graphics card trying to have it do too many operations at once. City of Heroes, while being a frame-destroying game in some zones, Grantville, for example, it's not necessarily a frame-destroying game because it's how can I put this? It's frame-destroying because it's badly architectured. There are a lot of Z calls, architecture that is drawn that probably didn't need to have been drawn. AMD actually had a fascinating insight into uh, City of Heroes, and that the original OpenGL code was basically designed by NVIDIA. Or the first OpenGL code, the OpenGL 1.4 path, I think was written in-house. OpenGL 2 support was basically added by NVIDIA. And as usual, included all of the normal NVIDIA sabotage. Flash forward, I need to get into the circle to do this, don't I? Because I'm losing track of where I am. Anyways, when work began on what became known as Ultra Mode or Ultra Mode graphics, AMD had become the partner of NCSoft and Paragon, and there were a number of very specific calls in the City of Heroes system that basically assumed you were using a bespoke NVIDIA graphics card. Cleaning a lot of that code up did result in the OpenGL 2.x path faster performance gains and overall better performance across all OpenGL 2.0 platform, 2.x platforms. The OpenGL 3 code was basically written by AMD and basically written to specification, which is, I think, someone I think in Homecoming is working on wrapping the OpenGL code into Vulkan, and apparently the Ultra Mode code is mapping very cleanly into Vulkan calls, which of course it would, since it's a by the book specification implementation of OpenGL and isn't relying on specific vendor calls that exist outside of the specification. And if you followed that, I'm very, very sorry. And this kind of ties into, I guess maybe one of the things I could talk about. Nvidia's in a bad spot right now. Various house of cards are falling down. Pictures have leaked showing the next generation Nvidia cards and also next generation AMD cards already in use in a digital currency mining operation. Question, how did those cards get there? They haven't even been announced in the case of the AMD card. It's not like they're exactly taped out. Well, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductors, have almost in large part thanks to Intel, been busted for, well, not telling the whole truth, as it were. The whole truth in this case being that TSMC has always openly embraced the concept that they are Apple first. Apple gets first dibs on all of TSMC's new processing nodes. Apple gets first dibs on all the production runs. It's Apple first, Apple first, Apple first. Well, that's not really as Intel and basically finding out when they entered into contractual negotiations, TSMC may have promoted Apple first, but it's really Nvidia second. Various Nvidia graphics cards, RTX 1X series, 2X series, and 3X series. Users started comparing the BIOS states and the known manufacturing dates and the available meta information that's exposed in the card data. Like if you bring up GPU Z, uh, and I'm doing it real quick on my card, it'll tell you your device ID, it'll tell you the release date, and it'll tell you the driver version, and somewhere in here it'll give you the BIOS version, and it'll give you the PC, the board ID, or at least it gives me the board ID on this. And when you start to cross-reference some of those numbers, something was strangely found. A lot of the NVIDIA graphics cards entering into the market had production dates or BIOS dates that preceded the actual announcement of the graphic cards. Well, what's going on? Well, the short version, NVIDIA was already giving out the specifications, the cards were being built, and then they were being handed off directly to miners who were then using them pretty much straight from the factory before the cards were ever even announced or even notified that they were in production. And this isn't the only skeevy thing that NVIDIA has done with digital currency mining or with graphics cards in general. I've notated in previous streams, we're coming upon evidence that NVIDIA executives actually had ownership interest in digital currency miners and thus were getting a financial return from the miners who were buying graphics cards or taking graphics cards at gunpoint or on orders of the national entity in which the miners were located, Communist China. We do know, or we're getting evidence now, that NVIDIA executives were getting kickbacks and stock incentives and other financial returns or fiduciary returns from the digital currency miners that they actually were their cards were going to instead of consumers. No wonder Nvidia hasn't been worried about the software ecosystem of Nvidia cards because they're getting money back either way. They don't care if the software ecosystem dies because, well, they're still getting rich. Now, how far now is that actually a violation? Probably under U.S. Securities and Exchange law, but in other nations, specifically China, I'm not so sure it's actually a violation. So, Nvidia may be heading for some serious jail time, or maybe not. I really don't. I'm not fully clear on what the legality is of if Nvidia executives were indeed receiving financial compensation as owners of digital currency miners that were stealing cards either directly or on orders from a government entity and then using that to mine digital currencies and scam other people out of money. Is our NVIDIA executives actually part of the scam? I think there's a legal argument there to say yes. Could I be the one to prove in court? I would need a lot more evidence. Anyway, so some of this is just coming to, and some of it is due to Intel trying to contract with TSMC to make fabrication parts, and you're seeing TSMC shoot back like, oh, Intel's too old. The leadership, they can't make Intel great again. And it's kind of, well, that's highly insulting. Well, in some ways, TSMC isn't wrong. Intel has a number of going woke, going broke executives who were there for the Gates and Ballmer era of Microsoft when all it took to ruin a competitor's fortunes was for the president of Intel to pick up the phone, call Bill Gates, and say, hey, your Xbox is not shipping with an AMD processor, it's shipping with a Celeron. original Xbox, if you weren't curious. And yes, Xbox executives or former Xbox executive finally fessed up that all it took to ruin the. If you notice, there were AMD engineers, AMD engineers sitting in the front seats of the Xbox unveiling who looked absolutely crushed when we're using an Intel Celeron. That was because up until the day beforehand, per former Xbox executives, they had been using an AMD processor. Except Intel had gotten bored of it, the president had called, and a day later, oh, guess what? We're using an Intel chip. Yeah, Intel still has a number of executives who that's the environment that they remember that they know how to operate in. And they're having a very difficult time adjusting to a world that not only doesn't need Intel, doesn't really like Intel, and really kind of wishes Intel would just go away. Uh, Now, there are some very good people, very good hires, very good movement from Intel, but they still have an executive branch that needs aggressive pruning. Uh, but anyways, part of the contention of Intel that's trying to not let the company sink into the abyss of forgotten memories, they've kind of been questioning some of the numbers they've been getting from TSMC, and it's really come to light from people inside TSMC who have cracked that Apple hasn't always had first shot at production runs. A lot of those test production runs, dialing machines in, were done on NVIDIA GPUs or done on AMD products that AMD may not have known about were being produced as part of test runs. And then those chips were then sold directly to vendors who weren't exactly on an approved vendor list. That's kind of disconcerting. And again, some of this is we're hearing people talk. Are they telling the truth? Well, looking at the BIOS states on NVIDIA graphics cards and cards that are dying under Amazon's new world and the horde of NVIDIA cards. The key figure here when we learned that NVIDIA was still producing 1660 cards when the 3060 was going into production. Why on earth would you still be producing a graphic card that is 2 generations old, NVIDIA? Oh, right, unless you're trying to hide something. Question is, what were you trying to hide? Why were you trying to hide it? Well, because maybe you were part of a fiduciary scam? Just asking. So Nvidia's kind of in a tight spot. They've, from pressure from Intel on TSMC, the war of words back and forth between Intel and TSMC, and Intel would really like to get those contracts signed, and I'm not sure it's going to break Intel's way. They just don't have the market power, the prestige to get TSMC to, play fairly. I would not count on any Intel chips manufactured at TSMC to be of good quality. I just wouldn't. Anyway, so we're very confident in saying that Nvidia had a second run or first prototype, second production run relationship with TSMC. And some other things that we've kind of learned in previous ongoing. Nvidia's kind of seen as the weak point right now. Everyone sees, uh, and I mean by everyone, most of the big players involved, they see Nvidia's faltering. The revolt of AMD and Samsung, the renewed relationship between Samsung and IBM, the now triumvirate of AMD, IBM, and Samsung, all and possibly Global Foundries being looped back in, and then the talk of Intel buying Global Foundries. I'm kind of part of me would like to see that happen. That would be interesting. But with all of this chaos and confusion just kind of swirling around in the atmosphere, everyone sees an opening because Nvidia is not serious about the graphics card market. If you think Nvidia is serious about gaming graphics cards and about getting affordable graphics cards into consumers' hands, if you think that Nvidia is serious about the software ecosystem of their graphic cards, uh, it's sort of like, admitting that you voted for Biden. It's sort of like everyone turns and looks at you and has to smack their hand against their forehead and go, "What were you thinking?" NVIDIA is not serious about gaming graphic cards. NVIDIA is not serious about graphic cards to begin with. NVIDIA is only serious about one thing: moolah. Who's going to pay them the most? What can they leverage the most of? What's going to get them the shortest term bang for buck? NVIDIA doesn't play well with others. And the ongoing shortages in the semiconductor industry, some of which seem to have been caused by NVIDIA having secret dealings and secret agreements with fabrication facilities that competitors didn't know about, couldn't compete against, couldn't even price themselves against because the dealings were unlisted. Uh, because of all of that going around, uh, everyone's everyone sees the tight spot that Nvidia's in, and there's a long list of people who have an axe to grind at the very least. And among those are the former executives of SIS and Trident, who years ago put together a company called XGI that was supposed to compete with ATI and NVIDIA, become the third graphics card vendor. Well, XGI had problems finding fabrication facilities to actually produce their cards. And okay, I actually have an AGP Valeri V8. Not that I have an AGP board to use it on. I can't ever bear to throw it away because it was kind of really unique, out there, unexpected, uh, unexpected graphic card. And SIS Trident before XGI had a significant victory in the retail market with a series of graphics called Cairo. Most gamers have heard of a console that even used Cairo graphics, the Dreamcast. But among the large problems with XGI's Valeri, although it was a worthy successor to the Cairo lineup, um, one of the things it wasn't very good at was, well, it shipped with no OpenGL support at all. It only shipped with DX drivers for DX9. And if all you're supporting is DX9, you've just erased a wide swath of games from your potential library, even when the XGI Valeri launched, limiting itself to DirectX 9. And on top of that, the drivers weren't very good. After I ran the graphic card myself, I just kept running into issues after issues after issues. Interesting concept, but it never really panned out. Now, the reason why XGI Valeri is important now is that we're seeing the same investors grouping up together again. And they're working with another vendor who's been in the graphic card market for a long time and has been jilted by both Intel and Apple, and that's PowerVR from Imagination Technologies. Imagination Technologies, they are no slouches when it comes to graphics drivers and rendering on Linux and rendering on Windows and rendering under other operating systems that use proprietary APIs. For a long time, PowerVR was the graphics provider of the integrated GPUs used in Intel systems, and they also provided graphics that were used in Apple products. Well, PowerVR has been ditched to the curve, with Apple saying we can build a better GPU in-house, and Intel also ditched PowerVR saying we can build better GPUs in-house. So PowerVR, they've always really been playing in the integrated space. They've never had a desktop graphics card uh, present. So what happens? I mean, serious question. What happens when you take a graphics design that's optimized for, say, 5 to 20 watts of operating power, is optimized for being used on a central processor's memory bus, is optimized for using shared memory, and you put it on a dedicated bus and ramp the wattage, incoming wattage, up to 200 watts? What do you think the result's going to be? And this is what we've seen happen over in China with these graphic cards that suddenly came out of nowhere, uh, that are racking serious memory counts, 12 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes. I think I saw one of them shipping with 32 gigabytes of memory, and they're rocking like GDDR5. The memory controller supposedly already supports up to GDR6 when GDDR6 lands, and people are scratching their heads and going, where did these come from? Who is this vendor? And then, you kind of read, oh, they're just licensed Power VR designs. I wouldn't be so quick to laugh or suggest that these cards aren't going to put a big dent in the mid range. Power VR has some talented developers. When you look at how to program in Vulkan, if you're looking for techniques, tutorials, or other information, Power VR's instructions on Vulkan programming are very good resources, and they've done a lot of technical demos showing exactly what Vulkan is capable of and how it can be optimized for a mobile platform. So a desktop graphic card with a 200 watt power balance using a Power VR GPU, I am not so sure is going to be a train wreck. Maybe there may be a legitimate process here, and one of the things we're seeing in some of these graphic cards is a big calling point of the XGI Valeri is that the architecture was supposed to be optimized for being used in multi-chip setups. And XGI talked a lot about having dual graphic cards, triple graphic cards, or triple GPUs on a card and quad GPUs on a card. Now, the dual GPUs that actually landed in retail uh, never really worked like you would have thought they would have worked. Everyone was expecting SLI-like performance, not understanding. Excuse me for a second. Not understanding that on DirectX 9 loads, DirectX 9 wasn't really a multi-threaded aware programming API. So tossing more threads at DirectX pretty much did nothing. So those dual chip Valeries never really showed any significant improvement over a single chip design. Basically because you couldn't make them multi-thread aware in a way that would boost performance. Now both DirectX 12 and Vulkan are designed with a limited subset of multi-threading in mind. When a lot of people saw the multi-threading capabilities first listed in Vulkan, almost everyone immediately jumped to the conclusion that SLI and Crossfire or NVIDIA SLI and AMD Crossfire or ATI Crossfire are being written into the Vulkan specification. Well, that's not quite true. The threading awareness in Vulkan, which was threading awareness originally in AMD's Mantle, which was adopted for both Vulkan and for DirectX 12, it really does form the root of both. The Mantle threading awareness was really more, and this goes back to if you're familiar with Bulldozer, the AMD processor architecture. Bulldozer was centered on the idea that the processor itself, the central processor, would have great integer performance, and floating point performance would be offloaded to the APU, the accelerated processing unit, or the graphic processor that's hosted next to the central processor. So Mantle was a aggressive extrapolation of this idea in that floating point operations were under Mantle designed to be offloaded to a different processing unit, and that kind of it got expanded into the multi-thread awareness modes of DirectX 12 and Vulkan. What this basically means is that if you have a separate processor, you can dictate separate parts of an API to address that processor. So if you have a graphic processor that's available on a separate bus, you can tell it to run your OpenCL commands, and that's a big thing for accelerating things like ray tracing, which you really do need a separate processor to run those calculations. Or you just need a separate group of threads to run those calculations. So DirectX 12 and Vulkan are very good at threading different aspects of what the overall APIs can do to different aspects of the hardware. So what this would mean in practice is, while those PowerVR GPUs in a desktop form might not offer double performance in rendering with 2 GPUs on 1 chip, they will be able to offer probably Vulkan ray tracing performance and the same resolution as being rendered on the primary chip, and the secondary chip can be threaded to just run the ray tracing calculations, which would be huge for Vulkan ray tracing performance in the mid-range, because NVIDIA doesn't match CUDA cores, or what they call them, doesn't match their CUDA cores for each of the traditional uh, rasterization and normal graphics pipeline. AMD, as far as I know, isn't doubling up their cores to have one section that does nothing but the calculations required for Vulkan ray tracing. I mean, they might in the next generation. The current ones aren't really programmed or designed like that. So this could be a big advantage for the PowerVR GPUs used on a desktop, and that the multi-GPU designs could very well be more aggressively tuned to offer overall performance boosts, get additional features that are computationally intensive, that are exposed through Vulkan and DirectX 12, or exposed into Vulkan through DirectX 12 using a wrapper, or the other way around, however it winds up being programmed, such as in the case with Valve's Proton. No pun intended. Keeping that in mind, then, is the PowerVR chips, the desktop PowerVR GPUs. Don't laugh at them, don't write them off. They probably are a serious market threat, but they are entirely reliant on PowerVR's capability to write, well, acceptable drivers. PowerVR has talented developers. They're very good at writing drivers that are very good at adhering to a specification. They may not be the most powerful, they may not be the most efficient, but they are very good at hitting the specification. However, once you go outside the specification, well, PowerVR is not really all that great, as evident by their lackluster performance over the years on Intel as the integrated GPU for Intel processors, and Intel's inability to address driver issues in a timely manner. And that's kind of another big what if looking at the PowerVR systems. They could be priced right. They could be offering enough substantial power in a targeted range where they really could make an impact and rip away the mid-range. But it's really going to depend on how committed PowerVR is to clawing back market share. And it also, I think, will depend on how aggressively PowerVR pushes an open source version of their drivers. One of the big advantages AMD and Intel have in the driver space is that their driver stacks are open sourced from top to bottom, or there is an open source driver from top to bottom, or you can get the specification to make an open source driver from top to bottom. And that gives game developers a big in onto how the Intel and AMD graphics cards work, and that gives them, at least in the case of the Xbox and the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One series, it gives significant amount of insight if you're using an open source driver into making changes to the driver and to the compiler of the driver to improve your performance. And I'm I'm not sure if Microsoft ready to talk about using an open source or using an open source Radeon driver or open source x.org driver in the Xbox Series X, but I think that's why we're seeing some of the uh, improvements on some games is the developers are actually getting to work with the driver and seeing what the driver does without having to rely on waiting around for changes to be made upstream. They can just make the changes to send the patches upstream, and then whether or not an upstream maintainer wants to implement them. So that's if that's what Microsoft has actually done with the Xbox with certain developers, wow, way to go. Really good move. But if they haven't, well, there's some questions that need to be answered. Anyways, getting back to Power VR, and a reason why it's what I'm seeing is on the people who are financing the entry of Power VR into the desktop graphics card space. I'm seeing a lot of names there that I recall from the XGI Valeri days, and I'm pretty certain we're looking at the same group of people who they see a market opening. They have a jilted hardware partner who really wants to make an impact, who has the talent, who has the hardware, but just doesn't have the production facilities to make an impact against the established giants. Intel, likewise, they see the same uh, opening. They see the number of graphic cards that are theoretically being produced, but not actually getting out into a retail market. And that's seen as a huge opening. There's literally millions of computers out there now, maybe tens of millions of computers that are running graphics hardware that's 10, 12, 15 years old that there's no upgrade replacements. There's just nothing out there because of the digital currency miners uh, pulling stock out and working with an existing chipset designer to get a hold of inventory before it even has a chance to be in a legitimate retail market. So Intel sees the marketing opportunity, and it's really a question of timing and product placement, and drivers are a big concern with Intel as well. And it's a large part thanks to Intel doing the legwork and groundwork, trying to get the contracts in place, to get the hardware that they need, to get the memory that they need, where it's, we're noticing that things aren't adding up. And to circle back around to, what about those Radeon 7000 cards that were in that digital currency mining facility? Where did those come from? The Radeon 7000's not even tapped out yet. Well, it may not be tapped out, but there definitely are early production samples already in flight. And it's becoming more clear that some of these samples were already done on a large production run, were already sent to a manufacturer, and that manufacturer's already assembled the boards and sold them to a digital currency miner. Now, whether or not AMD has any power to demand that those cards be returned and put on a legitimate market is a completely different question. They're gray market products that were probably never accounted for by AMD. And there is a large question there of whether or not some laws were violated if those cards are what they appear to be in selling and producing those cards. I mean, private companies are allowed to, make their own production runs, but if you're using somebody else's intellectual property and you're making a production run based on that property and that partner is trusting you to act in good faith and you're not acting in good faith, that's a whole can of worms right there that TSMC probably didn't want open, but I don't think they can put this Pandora back in her box. So getting back to NVIDIA's the one who's really in trouble here. NVIDIA's acting as they normally do, being a complete jerk about everything. They're still hammering on, and this is a good case in point here that I made on somebody else's YouTube channel in a statement where the game console market right now is really more complex than a lot of people really want to either address or think about. And a central problem here is that ray tracing has largely been confined to GPUs with NVIDIA CUDA. Now, CUDA technically exposes, at least on Windows platforms, the ray tracing ability through a DirectX API plugin. But Microsoft hasn't really been talking about this aspect of DirectX. In fact, if you were to ask any casual ray tracing fan off the top of their head, what's the name of the Microsoft Ray Tracing API, most of them will probably go, I have no idea, because they don't. They don't have any idea. But we do know a lot about the ray tracing API that's exposed in. Am I sitting on a jetpack? Yeah, sorry, while I try to think if I've got a jetpack. Yes, I do. Instead of trying to be cute about teleporting up here. All right. Anyways, yeah, that really just wrecked my train of thought. Microsoft hasn't really talked openly about their ray tracing API, and that's largely because it's not the API that's used for the ray tracing on Xbox Series X. Xbox Series X, and last time I checked, is using the Vulkan implementation of ray tracing. Gee, I wonder why. So NVIDIA, all of the ray traced games out there that are using NVIDIA ray tracing, most of them are using NVIDIA's CUDA, C-U-D-A, implementation, which use NVIDIA's proprietary cores. So it may be using an API that's exposed through DirectX, but the API is not an industry standard, pretty much very specific to NVIDIA's hardware and not really useful anyplace else. And I need to stop for a minute and answer the call of nature. Nature always call and collect. And we'll be back to continue this chaos stream. So we're just going to park back here. Anyways, welcome back. So where was I? Okay, before I go continue, I feel that I have to go over the idea of a software ecosystem again. And because this question almost always gets asked by somebody who's trying to get in on the get rich scam of cryptocurrencies. And they're who go like, well, Nvidia and AMD make money anyways. Mm, no, they don't. Not really. Uh, what you have to understand is, first of all, MSRP, the manufacturer suggested retail price point. And the manufacturer suggested retail price point is the price point at which the manufacturer calculates that the reseller can make a profit by covering the cost of the manufacturer, however much the manufacturer has to charge or pay in order for a product to get physically made, how much it's going to cost the retailer to keep that product on a store shelf, how much the retailer is going to have to pay themselves in terms of electrical use or uh, storage use or facility use in order to keep that product available or to market that product themselves to potential customers. MSRPs are calculated to cover all of that. It's why you've got wholesale stores like Costco and Sam's Club that offer products that are below the MSRP, and they offer them below the MSRP because Costco and Sam's Club take they are the warehouse where these items are stored. You have a membership club. You are using your membership fee to pay for the uh, various services that the club offers. So the MSRP is a very important price point because it's crucially the price point that's calculated where everyone involved can make a profit. Maybe not a big profit, but can probably make a profit. When vendors sell chips or sell cards directly to people who are not participating in the retail market, uh, the product vendor, AMD, still gets the same amount of money that they charge. Like we heard recently, AMD upped the prices of the chips that are being bought from AMD to being put into graphic cards. And AMD is doing this hopefully to cut down on the scalping because uh, they're looking to make it untenable for the vendor to price the chips or to sell the products without going through the retail chain. And that if the vendors sell the product, or if the vendors are contractually obligated to sell the product at one price point and they're not selling it at that price point, they're selling it to someone else, and they're not having to pay for warehousing, shipping, or whatever, they're making more comparative money because they're not spending that money that's calculated into the MSRP price. So AMD is kind of by raising prices to the vendor, looking to get the vendor to pay back more to the money that AMD would be receiving incidentally. And the incidental cost AMD gets, or Nvidia, or Intel, or PowerVR, or Inotech, or Silicon. I'm trying to remember what the name is of the remnants of XGI that have come together to put together a PowerVR desktop graphic cards. I think it's Silicon. I may have to go look that up. Uh, and I may do that on the next break. Anyways, the software where the money is made. The money is not necessarily made strictly on the sale of the physical hardware part. The money is also made in software services, and that if you need somebody to help you with your graphic design work, AMD has engineers that are available to help with software design work. They don't come cheap. They are very good at what they do. If you need someone to help with server processor design load, AMD has software engineers on hand who can be contracted out to help with big budget software design products. And these are the incidental services, not necessarily related to hardware, where a company really can make up a large amount of money in terms of profit, in terms of product overhead. And for a graphics company like AMD or Nvidia, there is a large amount of money to be made in helping other vendors put together products. Sorry, I just realized that I took off down on the normal sewer run instead of the abandoned sewer run because I was busy talking. Oh, well, we'll go ahead and finish this out and do the return trip. So I just caused myself extra runs through the sewer to get to every place that I need to be. Way to go, me! Alright, anyways, trying to get back on the topic. Uh, and it's like I referenced earlier, Paragon, NCSoft and Paragon hired AMD to come in and help with the graphics code for City of Heroes Ultra Mode. And that's almost a pure profit play for AMD because they're getting paid to send engineers over. They're not actually having to sell out cost to make hardware or put a product together. So that can be a very lucrative point, but you need a install base. You need products for the software to be targeted to in order for such an approach to be profitable. You need people who are using your hardware who need to buy those software or hardware resources, or you need somebody who needs to be trained on how to use your hardware and thus needs consultancy services. This is the software ecosystem. The more people you have using your hardware product, the more people you have using who are probably using your software packages and may need to mm, inquire as to pricing for additional help on optimizing the use of your hardware. To look at AMD's EPIC processor design. The EPIC processors are very powerful server processors, but the massive array of threads that they can bring to the table and the program optimization to make use of EPIC's memory architecture and design is incredibly complex. To get the most out of EPIC, if you're buying an EPIC processor, you probably also need to contract with AMD to have an AMD engineer who's very familiar with the hardware and very familiar with the operating system you're probably using to come in and help you configure your software to use their hardware to the maximum effect. And that's a very good profit stream for AMD. Game developers who need help with graphics, sure, uh, uh, they can use an engine, they can use third-party graphic utilities, they can use various tools that are available, but if they really want to get the best help they can get, being able to hire an engineer from the applicable graphics vendor is a big help. And it's something where most publishers, game publishers, do try to maintain friendly developer relations with uh, an upstream company who makes graphics hardware because that's how you get help if you need it to solve a particular problem. It's not just the hardware, it's the software ecosystem. Well, NVIDIA is not invested in the software ecosystem. NVIDIA doesn't care how many people actually have NVIDIA graphic cards. NVIDIA doesn't care how many of their cards are actually in circulation or even how old those cards are. NVIDIA, NVIDIA is an absolute NVIDIA is absolutely despicable when it comes to long-term development and support of their graphic cards, and a good case in point here is the AMD R300 through R500 series. These cards just got a massive overhaul on the Linux side driver, the x.org driver, where they've had features and calculatory capability added through a driver update. Even though these cards are no longer supported directly by AMD, nor are they even being sold or manufactured, but if you are using a Linux system with them, you got a massive graphics upgrade through a driver update, and that's large in part to AMD embracing an open source strategy. The uh, open source users figured out how they could bring some of these some of these newer features, these newer calculatory models, to an older graphic card, extending the life and also making those chips more useful for anyone who still has them. And it's also big news for someone who may be using critical server infrastructure, where you might still have mainframe style machines with some terminals, and you really don't want to upset the balance of them. You need to plug security holes. You need to do something to lock off potential exploits. And if your graphic driver can't be rebuilt, or there's no modern implementation of a driver for your graphic card, you could have some serious security vulnerabilities. Now, again, we're pulling at edge cases here, but this is one of the reasons why ongoing driver development and making sure that the capability exists for. Hang on, I'm about to face off against some Elite bosses here, and this may not end well for me. I'm keeping an eye on my endurance usage. Yeah, my endurance usage is plummeting. Alright. Oh, Windows mouth. Do I have anything I can... there's nothing else I can... Well, no other option for it. Gotta call in Geode. Oh, I'm about to run out of endurance again. I really wish I had taken the time to slot Ageless. Geode's got another 40 seconds. I can take out this. Geode's almost back up. Oh, stunned. Yeah. And I haven't picked up the self-res page one bidder. Doing fine till I ran out of endurance. Excuse me. Alright, so this time, take out the bosses first. Ah. Okay, I'm gonna go take another quick break. Dead air, dead air, dead air. Alright, just as a kind of quick update before I kill this off. The plumber who had been working on the bathroom uh, finally said it was okay to use it to take baths again. And it's not quite exactly put all the way back together, which is annoying, but you know, I'll get over it. So I'm going to kill this off here because I still got some work to do to finish cleaning up the bathroom so I can use it. And for once, not have to go to a relative place to use therapy.